The sky split open with a deafening roar, a streak of fire cutting through the night like a falling star. Trees trembled as the ground shook, and a thunderous crash echoed for miles. Somewhere deep in the forest, something had landed, something not of this world. In a small cabin at the edge of the woods, a man jolted awake. His heart pounded as he grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The air smelled of burnt metal and smoke. He hesitated, staring into the dark forest. He had lived alone for years, far from the noise of the world, but this was different. This was danger. Curiosity tugged at him. Against his better judgment, he ventured into the woods, flashlight in hand. The closer he got, the stranger the air felt, charged, almost electric. The trees were scorched, their branches twisted and broken. And then he saw it. A massive, jagged crater stretched before him, steam rising from its depths. At its center lay a strange, metallic object, part spaceship, part wreckage. His breath caught in his throat. This wasn't a plane or a meteor. This was something else entirely. Before he could process what he was seeing, a low growl echoed from the shadows. His flashlight flickered as he turned it toward the sound. There, half buried in the dirt, was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It was tall, its body covered in dark, armor-like scales. Its eyes glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. It was wounded, its side bleeding a strange, glowing liquid. The creature snarled, baring sharp teeth. The man froze, his instincts screaming at him to run. But something in the creature's eyes stopped him. It wasn't just anger he saw, it was pain, fear. This wasn't a monster. This was a warrior, far from home, fighting to survive. The creature tried to stand, but its legs gave out. It collapsed with a pained groan, its glowing eyes dimming. The man hesitated, his mind racing. He could leave it here, let nature, or the government, take its course. Or he could do something reckless, something foolish. He took a step forward. The creature growled again, but it was weaker this time. The man raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly, though he doubted it understood. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature watched him, its breathing labored. Slowly, the man knelt beside it, examining its wounds. The glowing liquid was warm to the touch, almost like blood but not quite. He tore a piece of his shirt and pressed it against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. The creature flinched but didn't attack. "You're hurt bad," the man muttered, more to himself than to the creature. "I don't know what you are, but I can't just leave you here." The creature's glowing eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, there was a strange understanding between them. It was as if the creature could sense his intentions, his fear, his compassion. It let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a sigh, and its body relaxed. The man knew he was taking a risk. This thing was dangerous, unpredictable. But he also knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. With great effort, he managed to lift the creature, supporting its weight as they stumbled back toward the cabin. The journey was slow and grueling, but the man didn't stop. He didn't know why he was doing this, why he felt compelled to help this alien being. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was something deeper. By the time they reached the cabin, the creature was barely conscious. The man laid it down on the floor, grabbing whatever supplies he could find to tend to its wounds. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Outside, the forest was silent, as if holding its breath. Inside, the creature's glowing eyes flickered, watching the man with a mix of suspicion and gratitude. Neither of them knew what the future held, but one thing was certain, their fates were now intertwined. And somewhere, far beyond the stars, others were watching. Waiting. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackling of the fireplace. The alien warrior lay on the floor, its massive frame barely fitting in the small space. Its breathing was shallow, but steady. The man sat nearby, watching it carefully. He had done all he could to treat its wounds, but he wasn't sure if it would be enough. This wasn't a human he was dealing with, this was something entirely unknown. The creature's glowing eyes flickered open, scanning the room. It tensed, its muscles coiling like a spring ready to snap. The man raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Easy," he said, his voice calm. "You're safe here." The creature growled, a deep, rumbling sound that made the hairs on the man's neck stand up. But it didn't attack. Instead, it seemed to be studying him, its eyes narrowing as if trying to figure him out. "I'm not your enemy," the man continued, keeping his tone soft. "I just want to help." For a long moment, they stared at each other, the tension thick in the air. Then, slowly, the creature relaxed, its body sinking back onto the floor. It let out a low, almost mournful sound, like a wounded animal. The man sighed in relief. He didn't know how much the creature understood, but it seemed to realize he wasn't a threat. He grabbed a blanket from the couch and draped it over the creature's body. It flinched at first but didn't resist. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" the man muttered, more to himself than to the creature. He sat down in a chair nearby, keeping a safe distance but close enough to keep an eye on it. The night passed slowly. The man dozed off a few times, but he never fully slept. Every time the creature stirred, he was instantly awake, ready to react if needed. But the creature didn't try to attack. It just lay there, watching him with those glowing eyes. By morning, the creature's condition seemed to have improved. Its breathing was stronger, and the glowing liquid from its wounds had stopped flowing. The man brought it a bowl of water, placing it on the floor nearby. The creature eyed it suspiciously but didn't move. "It's just water," the man said. "You must be thirsty." The creature hesitated, then slowly reached out with a clawed hand. It dipped a finger into the water, sniffing it cautiously before bringing it to its mouth. Its eyes widened slightly, as if surprised by the taste. Without warning, it grabbed the bowl and drank greedily, spilling water everywhere. The man couldn't help but smile. "Guess you were thirsty." Over the next few days, the man continued to care for the creature. He fed it whatever he could find, canned food, bread, even some raw meat from the freezer. The creature ate everything without complaint, though it seemed to prefer the meat. It was still wary of him, but the hostility had faded. Instead, there was a strange curiosity in its eyes, as if it was trying to understand him just as much as he was trying to understand it. One evening, as the sun set and the cabin was bathed in golden light, the man decided to try something. He sat on the floor a few feet away from the creature and held out his hand. "I don't know if you understand me," he said, "but I want you to know you're not alone here." The creature stared at his hand, its head tilted slightly. For a moment, it didn't move. Then, slowly, it reached out and touched his hand with its clawed fingers. The touch was gentle, almost hesitant. The man felt a surge of emotion, fear, yes, but also something else. Something like hope. "You're not so different from me, are you?" the man said softly. "You're just trying to survive." The creature made a low, rumbling sound, almost like a purr. It pulled its hand back and looked away, but the man could see a change in its demeanor. It wasn't just tolerating him anymore, it was starting to trust him. That night, as the man lay in bed, he thought about the creature. He didn't know where it came from or why it was here, but he knew one thing: it wasn't a monster. It was a living being, with its own fears and struggles. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel so alone. Outside, the forest was alive with the sounds of the night. Inside, the creature lay by the fireplace, its glowing eyes watching the flames. It didn't know what the future held, but for now, it was safe. And that was enough. The days turned into a week, and the alien warrior grew stronger. Its wounds healed, and its movements became more confident. It still didn't speak, but it had started to communicate in its own way, through gestures, sounds, and those glowing eyes that seemed to hold a universe of emotions. One evening, as the man sat by the fireplace, the creature approached him. It held out its clawed hand, revealing a small, metallic device. The man frowned, taking it carefully. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek, with strange symbols etched into its surface. "What is this?" he asked, turning it over in his hands. The creature made a series of low, guttural sounds, pointing at the device and then at its own head. The man didn't understand at first, but then it hit him. "Is this some kind of communication tool?" The creature nodded, or at least, it seemed to. It took the device back and pressed a button on its side. A holographic image flickered to life, projecting a scene into the air. The man's breath caught in his throat. The image showed a massive spaceship, sleek and menacing, floating in the darkness of space. Alien figures moved about, their armor similar to the creature's. The man realized he was looking at the warrior's home, or at least, the place it had come from. The scene shifted, showing a group of warriors gathered around a table. They were arguing, their voices harsh and guttural. The man couldn't understand their language, but their body language spoke volumes. There was tension, anger, betrayal. The creature pointed at one of the figures, a taller, more imposing warrior with a scar across its face. It growled, its eyes flashing with anger. The man understood. "That's the one who betrayed you, isn't it?" The creature nodded again, its expression dark. It pressed another button, and the scene changed. This time, it showed the warrior's mission, to scout Earth, gather information, and prepare for an invasion. But something had gone wrong. The warrior had been ambushed, its ship sabotaged, and left to die on this unfamiliar planet. The man felt a chill run down his spine. "So you were sent here to invade us?" The creature hesitated, then shook its head. It pointed at itself and then at the man, making a gesture that seemed to say, "Not anymore." The man leaned back, processing what he had just seen. This creature, this warrior, had been sent to Earth as part of a hostile mission. But it had been betrayed by its own kind, left stranded and wounded. And now, it was choosing to trust him, a human, over its own people. "Why?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you showing me this?" The creature looked at him, its glowing eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. It reached out and placed a clawed hand on his shoulder. The touch was firm but not threatening. It was a gesture of trust, of solidarity. The man felt a lump in his throat. He didn't know what to say. This creature, this alien warrior, had chosen him over its own kind. It had chosen peace over war. And in doing so, it had placed its life in his hands. "Okay," the man said finally, his voice steady. "We'll figure this out together. But you have to promise me one thing." The creature tilted its head, waiting. "No more secrets," the man said. "If we're going to do this, we need to trust each other. Completely." The creature nodded, its eyes never leaving his. For the first time, the man felt a sense of purpose, a reason to fight, to protect not just himself, but this strange, otherworldly being who had become his unlikely companion. That night, as the man lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. His mind raced with questions. What would happen if the warrior's people came looking for it? What would happen if the government found out? And most importantly, could he really trust this creature, or was he being naive? Outside, the forest was silent, but the man knew the peace wouldn't last. Something was coming. Something big. And when it did, he and the warrior would have to face it together. 3 days after the warrior shared its story, the man heard the distant hum of helicopters. His heart sank as he peered out the window and saw military vehicles rolling down the dirt road toward his cabin. They had found him, or rather, they had found the warrior. The creature was outside, sitting by the edge of the forest, its glowing eyes scanning the horizon. It had grown stronger over the past week, its movements more fluid, its presence more commanding. But even it couldn't stand against an army. The man rushed outside, his mind racing. "They're here," he said, his voice tense. "The military. They know about you." The warrior stood, its body tense, its claws flexing. It let out a low growl, its eyes narrowing as it stared in the direction of the approaching vehicles. The man could see the conflict in its expression, the instinct to fight, to protect itself, warring with the trust it had placed in him. "Listen to me," the man said, stepping closer. "If you fight them, they'll kill you. Or worse, they'll take you away, experiment on you. I can't let that happen." The warrior growled again, but this time, it was softer, almost questioning. It looked at the man, its glowing eyes searching his face. "I know you're scared," the man said. "I'm scared too. But we have to be smart about this. Let me talk to them. Let me try to handle this." The creature hesitated, its claws twitching. Then, slowly, it nodded. It trusted him. The man took a deep breath and walked toward the road, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The military vehicles screeched to a halt, and soldiers poured out, their guns trained on him. A man in a suit stepped forward, his expression cold and calculating. "We know you have something here," the suit said, his voice sharp. "Something that doesn't belong. Hand it over, and this doesn't have to get ugly." The man swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had to think fast. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's nothing here." The suit smirked, clearly not buying it. "Don't play dumb. We've been tracking unusual activity in this area for days. We know it's here. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do we have to do this the hard way?" The man glanced back at the cabin, his heart pounding. He could see the warrior watching from the shadows, its glowing eyes barely visible. He knew it was listening, waiting for his signal. "Look," the man said, turning back to the suit. "I don't want any trouble. But you're making a mistake. That thing, it's not what you think it is. It's not a threat." The suit raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what is it, exactly?" The man hesitated. He couldn't tell them the truth, not all of it. But he had to say something. It's lost. It's hurt. It just needs help." The suit laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Help? You expect us to believe that? That thing is dangerous. And you're harboring it. That makes you dangerous too." The man's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "You don't understand. It's not what you think. Just, give me a chance to explain." The suit's expression hardened. "We're done talking. Men, move in." The soldiers started forward, their guns raised. The man's heart raced. He had to do something, fast. He turned and shouted, "Run! Get out of here!" The warrior didn't hesitate. It burst from the shadows, its massive frame moving with surprising speed. The soldiers opened fire, but the creature was too fast. It dodged the bullets, its claws slashing through the air as it charged toward the trees. The man watched, his heart in his throat, as the warrior disappeared into the forest. The soldiers gave chase, but they were no match for its speed and agility. Within moments, it was gone. The suit turned to the man, his face red with anger. "You're going to regret this," he snarled. "You've just made a very big mistake." The man didn't respond. He just stood there, his hands still raised, his mind racing. He had bought the warrior some time, but he knew this wasn't over. The government wouldn't stop until they found it. And when they did, there would be no mercy. As the soldiers dragged him away, the man couldn't help but wonder if he had done the right thing. He had trusted the warrior, risked everything for it. But now, he was alone, and the creature was out there, hunted and vulnerable. Somewhere in the forest, the warrior paused, its glowing eyes scanning the trees. It could hear the soldiers shouting, their footsteps crunching through the underbrush. It knew it couldn't stay here. It had to keep moving, keep hiding. But it also knew one thing, it couldn't leave the man behind. He had risked everything to protect it. And now, it was time to return the favor. The man sat in the back of a military truck, his hands cuffed, his mind racing. The soldiers hadn't hurt him, yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they started asking questions he couldn't answer. He had to find a way out. He had to get back to the warrior. The truck rumbled down the dirt road, heading toward a nearby military base. The man glanced out the window, his eyes scanning the forest. Somewhere out there, the warrior was hiding, waiting. He just hoped it was safe. As the truck rounded a bend, the man noticed something strange. The forest seemed quieter than usual. The birds had stopped singing, and the air felt heavy, almost electric. He frowned, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. Suddenly, the truck lurched to a stop. The soldiers shouted, their voices tense as they jumped out of the vehicle. The man strained to see what was happening, but his view was blocked. All he could hear were the sounds of chaos, shouting, gunfire, and a low, rumbling growl that sent chills down his spine. The warrior. The man's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The creature had come for him. It was risking everything to save him. He had to act fast. Using the distraction, he kicked at the door of the truck, trying to force it open. It didn't budge. He glanced around, searching for something, anything, he could use to break free. His eyes landed on a loose piece of metal near the floor. He grabbed it and started working on the cuffs, his hands trembling with urgency. Outside, the chaos grew louder. The man could hear the soldiers shouting, their voices filled with panic. He didn't know what the warrior was doing, but it was clearly working. He just had to get out before it was too late. Finally, the cuffs clicked open. The man wasted no time. He kicked the door again, this time with all his strength. It flew open, and he tumbled out onto the dirt road. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes scanning the scene. The soldiers were scattered, their attention focused on the forest. The warrior was nowhere to be seen, but its presence was undeniable. Trees shook, and the ground trembled as it moved through the shadows, striking quickly and disappearing before the soldiers could react. The man knew he had to move. He ducked behind the truck, his mind racing. He needed a plan, a way to get to the warrior without getting caught. He spotted a soldier's radio lying on the ground nearby and grabbed it, tuning it to the frequency the military was using. "All units, fall back," a voice crackled through the radio. "We're dealing with a highly dangerous target. Do not engage alone." The man smirked. The warrior was giving them a run for their money. But he knew it couldn't last forever. They needed to get out of here, now. He pressed the button on the radio and spoke, his voice low and steady. "This is Agent Harris. The target is heading east. All units, converge on my position." There was a moment of silence, and then the voice responded. "Copy that, Agent Harris. Moving to your location." The man dropped the radio and sprinted into the forest, his heart pounding. He didn't know how long the ruse would last, but it bought him some time. He just had to find the warrior. As he ran, he heard a familiar growl behind him. He turned and saw the creature emerging from the shadows, its glowing eyes locked on his. Relief washed over him, but there was no time for words. The warrior gestured for him to follow, and he didn't hesitate. They moved quickly and quietly through the forest, the warrior leading the way. It seemed to know exactly where it was going, its movements confident and precise. The man followed, trusting it completely. After what felt like hours, they reached a small clearing. The warrior stopped, its eyes scanning the area. The man caught his breath, his mind racing. "What now?" he asked. The creature turned to him and pointed at the sky. The man frowned, confused. Then he heard it, a faint hum, growing louder by the second. He looked up and saw a small, sleek aircraft descending from the clouds. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, its design clearly alien. The man's eyes widened. "Is that yours?" The warrior nodded, its expression serious. It gestured for him to get ready. The man didn't know what to expect, but he trusted the creature. He had come this far, he wasn't about to back out now. As the aircraft landed, the warrior grabbed the man's arm and pulled him toward it. The door slid open, revealing a dimly lit interior. The man hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The warrior followed, and the door closed behind them. The man looked around, his mind reeling. The interior of the aircraft was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek, futuristic, and filled with strange technology. He didn't know where they were going or what would happen next, but one thing was clear: his life would never be the same. The warrior sat down in a chair, its glowing eyes meeting his. It let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a sigh of relief. The man smiled faintly, his heart still racing. "Well," he said, "I guess this is it." The warrior nodded, its expression unreadable. The aircraft lifted off, soaring into the sky. Below, the forest grew smaller and smaller until it was just a blur. The man didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he and the warrior were in this together. And no matter what happened, they would face it side by side. The alien aircraft soared through the sky, its smooth movements almost soothing despite the chaos they had left behind. The man sat in one of the strange, cushioned seats, his eyes wide as he took in the futuristic interior. The warrior sat across from him, its glowing eyes watching him intently. "So," the man said, breaking the silence, "where are we going?" The warrior tilted its head, as if considering how to respond. It reached out and tapped a panel on the wall. A holographic map flickered to life, showing a remote, mountainous region far from any human settlements. "There?" the man asked, pointing at the map. The warrior nodded. The man leaned back, his mind racing. He didn't know what to expect, but he trusted the warrior. Over the past few days, the creature had gone from a fearsome alien to something almost familiar. It was still intimidating, with its sharp claws and glowing eyes, but there was a gentleness to it now, a sense of loyalty that the man couldn't ignore. As the aircraft descended into the mountains, the man noticed something strange. The warrior seemed different. Its movements were less rigid, its posture more relaxed. It almost looked like it was enjoying itself. When they landed, the warrior led the man to a hidden cave, its entrance concealed by thick vegetation. Inside, the cave was surprisingly cozy, with soft moss covering the floor and a small stream running through it. The warrior gestured for the man to sit, then disappeared deeper into the cave. A few minutes later, it returned, carrying something in its claws. The man's eyes widened as he realized what it was: a fish, freshly caught from the stream. The warrior dropped it at his feet and made a gesture that clearly meant, "Eat." The man couldn't help but laugh. "You're feeding me now?" The warrior tilted its head, as if confused by his reaction. It picked up the fish and held it out to him, its expression almost earnest. Okay, the man said, still chuckling. "I'll eat it. But next time, let's cook it first, all right?" The warrior watched as the man started a small fire and cooked the fish. It seemed fascinated by the process, its glowing eyes following every movement. When the fish was done, the man offered some to the warrior, but it shook its head, gesturing for him to eat. As they sat by the fire, the man couldn't help but notice how much the warrior had changed. It was no longer the fearsome, aggressive creature he had found in the forest. It was calmer, more curious, almost domesticated. It reminded him of a loyal dog, eager to please and protect. "You know," the man said, his voice soft, "you're not so scary anymore. In fact, you're kind of cute." The warrior let out a low growl, but there was no real anger behind it. It almost seemed to be playing along, its glowing eyes narrowing in mock annoyance. The man laughed again, feeling a sense of warmth he hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He had a companion, a strange, otherworldly companion, but a companion nonetheless. Over the next few days, the warrior continued to adapt to life on Earth. It learned to catch fish, gather berries, and even help the man build a makeshift shelter. It still didn't speak, but it communicated in its own way, through gestures, sounds, and those glowing eyes that seemed to hold a universe of emotions. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the man decided to try something. He picked up a stick and started drawing in the dirt. He drew a crude picture of the warrior, then pointed at it and said, "You." The warrior tilted its head, studying the drawing. Then, to the man's surprise, it reached out and added something to the picture, a small figure next to the warrior. It pointed at the figure and then at the man. The man's heart swelled with emotion. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick. "That's us. Together." The warrior let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a purr. It was a sound of contentment, of trust. The man smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection. As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, the man realized something. This creature, this alien warrior, had become more than just a companion. It had become a friend. And together, they had found something rare and precious, a bond that transcended species, language, and even worlds. But the man also knew their peace wouldn't last forever. The government was still out there, searching for them. And the warrior's past, its mission, its betrayal, still loomed over them like a shadow. For now, though, they were safe. And that was enough. The peace of the mountains didn't last. One morning, as the man and the warrior were gathering food near the stream, they heard the distant roar of engines. The man froze, his heart sinking. He knew that sound, helicopters. The government had found them. The warrior growled, its glowing eyes narrowing as it scanned the sky. It moved closer to the man, its body tense and ready for action. The man could see the conflict in its eyes, the instinct to fight, to protect, warring with the trust it had placed in him. "We can't stay here," the man said, his voice urgent. "They'll surround us. We have to move." The warrior nodded, its expression grim. It gestured for the man to follow and led him deeper into the forest, away from the approaching helicopters. They moved quickly and quietly, but the man knew it wouldn't be enough. The military had technology, resources, and numbers. They were outmatched. As they ran, the man's mind raced. He had to think of a plan, a way to outsmart the soldiers and buy them some time. He glanced at the warrior, its massive frame moving effortlessly through the trees. It was strong, fast, and intelligent. If they worked together, maybe they had a chance. "Listen," the man said, panting as they reached a rocky outcrop. "We need to split up. You draw them away, and I'll find a way to disable their equipment. If we can cut off their communication, we might have a shot." The warrior hesitated, its glowing eyes searching his face. It didn't like the idea of leaving him, but it understood the logic. Finally, it nodded and let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound of agreement. The man reached out and placed a hand on the warrior's arm. "Be careful," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We're in this together, remember?" The warrior nodded again, its expression serious. Then, without warning, it turned and charged into the forest, letting out a roar that echoed through the trees. The man watched it go, his heart pounding. He knew the warrior could handle itself, but he couldn't shake the fear that this might be the last time he saw it. Shaking off the thought, the man turned and headed in the opposite direction. He moved quickly, his eyes scanning the forest for any sign of the soldiers. He didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, he spotted a group of soldiers setting up a communication relay. They were focused on their task, unaware of his presence. The man crouched behind a tree, his mind racing. He needed a distraction, something to draw their attention away from the relay. He glanced around and spotted a large rock nearby. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the rock and hurled it as far as he could. It landed with a loud thud, causing the soldiers to turn and investigate. The man didn't waste a second. He darted out from his hiding spot and sprinted toward the relay, his heart pounding in his chest. As he reached the relay, he grabbed a nearby tool and started smashing the equipment. Sparks flew as the relay shorted out, its lights flickering and dying. The soldiers shouted, their voices filled with panic as they realized what was happening. The man didn't stick around to see their reaction. He turned and ran, disappearing into the forest before they could catch him. He didn't know how much time he had bought them, but it was better than nothing. As he ran, he heard the sound of gunfire in the distance. His heart clenched. The warrior. It was out there, facing the soldiers alone. He had to get to it. The man followed the sound, his legs burning as he pushed himself to move faster. When he finally reached the source of the noise, he froze. The warrior was surrounded, its massive frame towering over the soldiers as they fired at it. It was holding its own, but it was outnumbered. Without thinking, the man charged forward, shouting at the top of his lungs. The soldiers turned, their guns trained on him. The warrior seized the opportunity, lunging at the soldiers and knocking them to the ground. The man grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and fired into the air, causing the remaining soldiers to scatter. He didn't want to hurt anyone, but he had to protect the warrior. As the soldiers retreated, the man turned to the warrior, his chest heaving. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. The warrior nodded, its glowing eyes meeting his. It let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound of gratitude. The man smiled faintly, his heart swelling with relief. But their victory was short-lived. The sound of more helicopters filled the air, and the man knew they were running out of time. He looked at the warrior, his expression serious. "We can't keep running," he said. "We have to end this. Once and for all." The warrior nodded, its expression grim. It understood. This was their final stand. The sound of helicopters grew louder, their rotors slicing through the air like the hum of an angry swarm. The man and the warrior stood side by side, their backs against a rocky outcrop, their eyes scanning the sky. The soldiers had regrouped, and now they were closing in, their weapons ready. The man's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. He looked at the warrior, its glowing eyes filled with determination. "This is it," he said, his voice steady. "We fight together. No matter what happens, we fight together." The warrior nodded, its massive frame tense and ready. It let out a low growl, a sound that was both fierce and reassuring. The man tightened his grip on the weapon he had taken from the soldier, his mind racing. He didn't know if they could win, but he knew they had to try. The first wave of soldiers appeared, their guns trained on the pair. The man and the warrior didn't wait for them to attack. They charged forward, the warrior's claws slashing through the air as the man fired his weapon. The soldiers were caught off guard, their formation breaking as they scrambled to defend themselves. The warrior moved like a force of nature, its massive frame barreling through the soldiers with ease. It was fast, strong, and relentless, its glowing eyes flashing with fury. The man stayed close, covering its back and taking down any soldiers who got too close. But the soldiers kept coming. More helicopters arrived, dropping reinforcements into the fray. The man and the warrior were outnumbered, and it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. As the battle raged on, the man noticed something strange. The soldiers weren't trying to kill the warrior, they were trying to capture it. They fired nets and tranquilizer darts, their movements coordinated and precise. The man realized what was happening. The government didn't want to destroy the warrior, they wanted to study it, to use it for their own purposes. The thought filled him with anger. He couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't let that happen. "We need to end this," the man shouted over the noise of the battle. "Now." The warrior nodded, its glowing eyes meeting his. It understood. Together, they fought their way to the center of the battlefield, where the soldiers' command post was set up. The man knew that if they could take out the leaders, the rest would fall into chaos. The warrior charged forward, its claws tearing through the soldiers' defenses. The man followed, his weapon firing as he moved. They were a team, their movements perfectly synchronized. They reached the command post, and the warrior let out a roar that shook the ground. The soldiers froze, their weapons lowering as they stared at the massive creature before them. The man stepped forward, his voice loud and clear. "This ends now," he shouted. "You don't have to do this. Let us go, and no one else gets hurt." For a moment, there was silence. The soldiers hesitated, their eyes flickering between the man and the warrior. Then, one of the leaders stepped forward, his expression cold and unyielding. "Stand down," he ordered. "This is your last warning." The man shook his head. "No. This is yours." The warrior let out another roar, its glowing eyes blazing with intensity. The soldiers faltered, their confidence wavering. The man could see the fear in their eyes, the doubt creeping in. They were starting to realize that they were outmatched. The leader hesitated, his hand hovering over his weapon. Then, slowly, he lowered it. "Fall back," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The soldiers obeyed, retreating to their vehicles and helicopters. The man watched as they left, his heart still racing. He couldn't believe it. They had done it. They had won. As the last of the soldiers disappeared into the distance, the man turned to the warrior, his chest heaving. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." The warrior nodded, its glowing eyes softening. It let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound of relief. The man smiled faintly, his legs giving out as the adrenaline faded. He sat down on the ground, his hands trembling. The warrior sat beside him, its massive frame a comforting presence. They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the forest slowly returning. Birds chirped, the wind rustled through the trees, and the world felt peaceful once more. The man looked at the warrior, his expression serious. "What now?" he asked. "Where do we go from here?" The warrior tilted its head, its glowing eyes thoughtful. Then, it reached out and placed a clawed hand on the man's shoulder. It was a gesture of trust, of solidarity. The man smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "Yeah," he said softly. "We'll figure it out. Together." The days that followed were quiet. The military didn't return, and the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The man and the warrior stayed in the mountains, their bond stronger than ever. They had faced impossible odds and come out on the other side, not just as allies, but as friends. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the man sat by the fire, staring into the flames. The warrior sat beside him, its glowing eyes reflecting the light. It had changed so much since they first met. The fierce, intimidating creature was now calm, almost gentle. It had adapted to life on Earth in ways the man never thought possible. "You know," the man said, breaking the silence, I used to think I was alone. Before you came along, I didn't have much to live for. But now I feel like I have a purpose. Like I'm part of something bigger." The warrior tilted its head, its expression thoughtful. It reached out and placed a clawed hand on the man's shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar over the past few weeks. The man smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know what the future holds," he continued, his voice soft. "But I do know one thing, I'm glad you're here. You've changed my life in ways I can't even explain." The warrior let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound of agreement. It looked at the man, its glowing eyes filled with something the man could only describe as affection. Then, it did something it had never done before. It leaned forward and gently pressed its forehead against the man's. The man froze, his breath catching in his throat. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. It was a sign of trust, of friendship, of love. Tears welled up in the man's eyes as he realized just how far they had come. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "For everything." The warrior pulled back, its glowing eyes meeting his. It let out a soft growl, a sound that was both comforting and reassuring. The man smiled, wiping away his tears. He knew their journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. The next morning, the man woke up to find the warrior standing at the edge of the clearing, its eyes fixed on the horizon. The man joined it, his heart heavy with a sense of finality. He knew what was coming. "You're leaving, aren't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The warrior nodded, its expression solemn. It pointed at the sky, then at the man, as if to say, "I have to go, but I'll never forget you." The man swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I understand," he said, his voice thick. "You have your own world to return to. Your own life. I want you to know that you'll always have a home here. With me." The warrior let out a low, rumbling sound, a sound of gratitude. It reached out and placed a clawed hand on the man's chest, right over his heart. The man placed his hand over the warrior's, his eyes filled with tears. "Take care of yourself," he said, his voice breaking. "And thank you. For showing me what it means to be brave, to trust, to love." The warrior nodded, its glowing eyes softening. Then, it turned and walked toward the clearing, where its sleek, alien aircraft waited. The man watched as it climbed inside, his heart aching with a mix of sadness and pride. As the aircraft lifted off, the warrior looked down at the man one last time. It raised a clawed hand in a gesture of farewell, its glowing eyes filled with emotion. The man raised his hand in return, a smile on his face despite the tears streaming down his cheeks. "Goodbye, my friend," he whispered. The aircraft soared into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. The man stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where it had vanished. He felt a sense of loss, but also a sense of hope. The warrior had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined, and he knew he would carry its memory with him forever. As he turned and walked back to the cabin, the man felt a strange sense of peace. He had faced his fears, fought for what he believed in, and found a friendship that transcended worlds. And in doing so, he had discovered something priceless, the courage to live, to love, and to hope. The forest was quiet, the air filled with the sounds of nature. The man smiled, his heart light. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing, he was ready to face it.